can also use social media to organize an attack on Israel like the one we saw today. This attack, by the way, obviously went a long way beyond Scopus. There were attacks all throughout the borders of Israel today, and as near as I can tell from all the reporting, it was organized through social media by people living in at least 4 different places.
When we think and we talk about politics, I've met a lot of people who want to ascribe the radicalization of politics to the web and to the digital revolution. I'm not saying that it's not one of the factors that's gone into it. I just don't know. There's a little bit of chicken and egg here. And there was one day where Tablet, it doesn't have a political perspective. We publish pieces from people from all sides of the political spectrum. And that's disconcerting for people because they don't know how to peg us. They don't know what we are. So there was literally one day where we published a 9,000-word piece that essentially said that neoconservative politics was the most important development in political theory of modern times. And on the same day, Rush Limbaugh called Tablet a radical left-wing operation.
As an example of how misinformation can spread, and it has real consequences, not just in reputation, but possibly even in lives and in people's fortunes. And one incident that I always mention is there's a young man right now who's being held in Iran named Josh Batal. The young man, I believe he might be Jewish, I don't know. He was arrested hiking on the border. I don't know what he was doing there, it's kind of mysterious. But he's being held for hiking on the border, and immediately when he was arrested, there was speculation that he was some kind of a foreign operative. Story, and did a basic Google search and decided there was a guy named Josh Fatal who went to the Yeshiva of Flatbush High School. So this Josh Fatal is a guy who lives in Oregon, and he's hiking around, and in his spare time he goes to the Yeshiva of Flatbush High School and writes for the Jewish Week. Because the Jewish Week had a byline of a young high school kid for our Fresh Ink section, which is for teenagers. And his name was Josh Patel. So it never occurred to the blogger that 2 people, perhaps in a world of billions of people, have the same name. So, and imagine how damaging a guy who's being arrested in Iran and charged with being God knows what kind of Zionist spy to have it come out that he wrote articles for the Jewish Week.
Text on paper. Nowadays, you can't run a website that way. It can't just be text. It's got to be interactive, as all my colleagues have said. It's got to be pictures. It's got to be video. It's got to be what we used to call television. If your staff is a third of what it used to be, if your editorial staff is a fraction of what it used to be, your report is going to be a fraction of what it used to be.
Just earlier that the Times should be, in a sense, a Jewish newspaper. And the realization time after time that it's not. That our correspondents in Jerusalem, for example, are going to be covering Israelis and Palestinians as evenly as they can, and without necessarily a built-in bias, for example, that settlements should or should not exist, or without necessarily even providing all of the historical background that people want to see whenever those kinds of issues come up. The Times, it's owned by a family that's identified with the Jewish community, even though that's a somewhat tenuous connection.
Sorry, I have a huge bugaboo about this. My issue with the difference between the New York Times and every other newspaper, a Jewish newspaper, to me seems to say something to me about American Jews. I know that I speak for everybody on this panel when I say any organization devoted to helping make journalism, mine and others, more accurate is welcome. I want to see mistakes that get made. I want to understand why we're making the mistakes that we're making. That said, the obsession with the New York Times on the part of American Jews has become unhealthy. And, one of the last summer I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, actually, about a conversion bill that was making its way through the Knesset. This is something that we wrote about on Tablet for weeks. We were covering this story. Every newspaper on this panel was covering this for weeks. I didn't hear boo. Not from administration officials, not from people in the Knesset, not from readers, nothing. Nobody cared. I write about it for the New York Times. Everybody's up in arms. All of a sudden, I'm getting calls from Knesset members. There's something wrong with this. You want the New York Times to be a Jewish newspaper. It's not going to be, and it shouldn't. It has a different role. It's very, very important, but I think it's also natural for people and Jews to want to see their own lives reflected in their newspapers. That's the reason why there's an incredibly healthy Jewish journalistic landscape. We should be grateful for it. Find a newspaper that you love. Also read the Times and grouse about it, but in addition, have another newspaper that speaks to you directly.